Google with a preview ad for their new Pixel 10 phones with Gemini as a key feature. Big news of the week is the launch of OpenAI's GPT-5. OpenAI released a new open source models, releasing what it named GPT-OSS. Google also rolled out what they're calling Gemini 2.5 DeepThink. Anthropic dropped an update to their flagship model called Claude Opus 4.1. Grok Imagine from XAI, a new image and video generator. 11 Labs launched what they called 11 Music this week, the release from Google's DeepMind of a new world model, an update to their Genie world model, Genie 3. Google just launched a Gemini Storybook. Microsoft just dropped something they called Clio, and it's a big step towards giving large language models the ability to adapt their reasoning in real time. Google DeepMind and Kaggle launched Game Arena. It's an open source platform designed to test frontier AI models in strategic head-to-head games. Google came back with its own student engagement product called Guided Learning in Gemini. OpenAI discussing how it's rethinking what success actually looks like for ChatGPT. Welcome back to What the AI. In this format will be a little different as summer vacation schedules have left me all out of co-hosts this week. So you just get me. We'll be back to a more normal format next week, but there's a lot to cover this week. So let's go ahead and hop in. I want to start off with a little funny thing I saw. Google out with a preview ad for their new Pixel 10 phones with Gemini as a key feature. And I love this because they're throwing some serious shade at Apple. And it starts off, if you buy a new phone because of a feature that's coming soon. Here we're talking about Siri with actual LLM capabilities, but it's been coming soon for a full year. Should you change your definition of soon, or could you just change your phone? I don't know if Gemini over Siri is going to be enough to get me to switch off my iPhone to an Android, though I have thought about it a lot, but I just thought that was a super clever ad. Is a better LLM in the assistant enough to make you switch phones? Let me know. I think it will be for some, but probably not for that many. But we're going to start off this week's news rundown with a lot of news in the large language model front. And of course, the big news of the week is the launch of OpenAI's GPT-5. This is rolling out to all users, including free tier users. So if you're curious about the latest and greatest LLM, this is it. And you can go try it on the web or in your app now. There's a lot of updates in this. And of course, the model is theoretically much smarter, and there are going to be all sorts of benchmarks for that. But I wanted to highlight for you the 5 key takeaways I had for what made GPT-5 a kind of different model. So here we go. Number one, it's got this, what I'll call one model to rule them all. So unlike previously where you were supposed to get smart about them, by using O4 or 4.0, which were very different models, even though I couldn't tell the difference in the name very well, this time ChatGPT intelligently routes your query to the right model. And it seems like there are different underlying models, some that do more of the reasoning, deep thinking, step by step, some that are faster for quick factual answers for stuff it knows. But the goal here is that the user doesn't have to choose which model a task is best suited by. It'll actually just pick for you. So if it's a hard question, it may use the thinking model and think for a while. If it's a simple question, it'll respond really fast for you. So this really where ChatGPT, OpenAI have been saying they're going to head, where they don't like what they call the model picker, the little drop down with all the models. For you pro users out there is still a drop down for a GPT-5 Pro and a GPT-5 thinking model, but most users, I think, are just going to default to going in, typing in, maybe saying think hard or give me a step-by-step and getting out the answer. And I think this is really the future. We don't, in the end, as end users, want to think about the model, at least in a consumer app product. So number one model to rule them all. Second up, they really leaned into coding capabilities. I think maybe this is because they're feeling the heat from Anthropic and their Claude model really kind of leading the way in coding, both in terms of benchmarks for intelligence around coding, but also kind of the most popular model in things like Cursor and Windsurf. And also importantly, the Claude Code agent, this kind of independent agent that works in the background, is considered to be really good, much better than OpenAI's similar agent. And it seems like GPT-5 is really trying to close the gap, handling longer form tasks, more natural integration to tools like different development tools or your GitHub repo. And so it seems like they are really trying to lean into the agentic coding capabilities, not just the vibe coding, do stuff on your own, but for developers who have a large code base who want to use this as a tool to augment their capabilities. It seems like they're leaning into that. And I think in no small part because they see Anthropic as one area where Anthropic's they're way ahead in terms of consumer adoption, but developer adoption, Anthropic's been winning, and GPT-5 seems to be very much aimed at an answer to that struggle that they've had. All right, one model to rule them all. 2, coding capabilities. 3, I think everyone's going to love this. A lot of their presentation was focused on reduced hallucinations. So you really see this discussion about how many things they're not getting wrong, how many bad answers they're not giving, when GPT will tell you that it's doesn't know or will kind of opt out of giving an answer if it's not sure. So this is clearly one of the things OpenAI and many of the developers feel is super critical to gaining a more regular usage from their consumer base, particularly in more professional type tasks where getting the answer wrong is a really big deal. And so I think you saw a lot of focus not just on am I smarter and know more things, but can I more reliably give the correct answer? And so I thought this was a pretty big focus for them. I think it'll be a pretty big deal if we really see across multiple people's usage over time that this holds true. I think the trust in feeling like you're going to get either I don't know or a realistic, honest, good answer, accurate answer to queries is going to be critical. Obviously, if you're using this for writing and things, it's not that critical because there's really no right answer. But when you're using it for informational searches, this is crucial. And it really does seem like they've made a big stride in terms of reducing hallucination. So that's my number three. Number four, we talked about hallucinations aren't as big a deal if you're writing because they're kind of creativity and the new thing that's coming out. And a lot of people have said, at least under initial reactions, and I do have to caveat all this with it's only been out for a day. So as I record this, so we don't have a lot of reviews of how GPT-5 is performing and what the real deltas appear to be. But upon first inspection, it does feel like it's a better writer. This was obviously hard to judge. There's no real benchmarks for how quality is your prose, how natural do you sound. But every person I've seen says it seems more realistic, more natural, more emotionally resonant. It kind of gets nuance and things better. Still likes the M dash. It's a lot of M dashes in the writing, especially for those teachers who felt like they could identify ChatGPT writing because it just didn't sound human, didn't sound natural. That is clearly shifting, and there's been a big focus on having a more natural sounding output. So if you do use ChatGPT in any of your writing processes, I think this will be a big win for you because this is a pretty nice shift. And I use it a lot for helping me write things like this rundown, helping me write some of my posts. And I think it's going to be a nice shift to see a little higher quality prose output in there. And there's many other updates, but the last one that struck me, and I've been playing with this a little bit, is the addition of personalities and how you want your answers. So if you don't like that default chat GPT, what some have termed a sycophantic tone, where it tends to tell you how smart you are and how brilliant your question is before it gives you a straight answer and tends to sugarcoat feedback. There are now a few preset personalities you can choose among, including a cynic, which sounds a little harsh to me, but maybe the one I need, a robot, listener, and nerd, an enthusiastic explorer of new information. So you can get a kind of different flavor of personality from ChatGPT. I was a little disappointed to see that this seems to be a setting at the user level and not at the chat level, because I can certainly see when I'm in certain kinds of writing, I want the cynic, the harsh critic giving me direct feedback. That's really what I want in most of my work on this podcast. But then when I'm trying to learn something new, I really want to lean into something more like the nerd and enthusiastic explorer offering ideas of where I could go next. And so I feel like hopefully this will evolve over time into something you can pick not just at a user level in the settings menu, but something you can pick on a per chat basis if you'd like to use a different personality for different kinds of usage. If you have got your own takeaways or feedback on GPT-5, I'd love to hear them. Just hit us up at email@whattheai.fm. This is a pretty big launch. We've been waiting for it for a long time, and it's finally here, and we're all going to play with it. So it's going to be a fun week as we all kind of throw our new queries and questions into Chat GPT-5 and see what comes back. Now, this may be hard to believe, but my next story is also a new model release from OpenAI. So ChatGPT-5, not the only one that came out this week from OpenAI. Before the GPT-5 announcement, OpenAI made good on its promise to release a new open source models, releasing what it named GPT-OSS, its first open weight model in over 6 years. And here's the kicker, totally free to download, and it runs locally, even on a laptop. Well, maybe not my laptop, but some laptops. There are two versions of GPT's open source open weights model, a 120 billion parameter model that runs on a single NVIDIA GPU, and a smaller 20 billion parameter model that works with just 16 gigabytes of memory. So there are laptops out there with 16 and even more gigabytes of memory. And if you have one, you might be able to download GPT OSS and run it locally on your laptop. You might find that it's a pretty slow experience to do that, but it can be done. And I'm sure developers will be really intrigued by what they can build on top of these in a local environment. Performance wise, The larger model, they say, is comparable roughly to O4 Mini, and the smaller one holds its own next to O3 Mini. GPT-OSS can reason, write code, browse the web, and even operate agents using OpenAI's APIs. I do think it's funny, both those comparisons, O4 Mini, O3 Mini, none of them to GPT-5, and I think this is one of the reasons they released OSS before they released GPT-5, is they don't have to they don't have to do a comparison to how it does to their latest, greatest state-of-the-art model. And I think that's probably because it doesn't hold up as well under the comparisons to GPT-5. This is, though, a pretty big shift from OpenAI's. I mean, their initial stance was a lot of open source. That was really where they were headed. But then more recently, Sam Altman has been out saying there's just too many safety risks with having an open weight, open source model. They can't put some of the constraints and guardrails around the model that they can when they keep it closed source and keep it in-house, and they can add those on top of the core model. But as we saw developers just flocking to rivals like DeepSeek, Meta's Llama, and some of these other models that are out there, OpenAI admitted it had been, quote, on the wrong side of history and decided to jump back in. It says it's been rigorously tested, and it's their safest model yet with built-in transparency features like visible reasoning. But it is an interesting thing to see them switching from, hey, open source seems to be a kind of dangerous path, to, hey, there's a lot of open source out there. Maybe we should be in that game. It'll be interesting to see how much they invest in this. I really think OpenAI is stuck in a tough spot determining whether they want to be an API-driven company focused on powering developers building AI-powered applications. That's really where Anthropic, most of their money has come from, or whether they're really going to lean into the Chat GPT accidental consumer product that's really taken the world by storm. It feels like their opportunity is really behind ChatGPT. So the open source may be an easy way for them to put a model out there, be in the game. They don't have to host it. I'm sure Microsoft and Amazon and Google are all going to be out there hosting this model very quickly. But it is interesting to see them in that game, where I think their real huge opportunity really lies in making ChatGPT the dominant consumer interface for AI, and really kind of synonymous with AI, the way Google has become synonymous with search. Really, when you say you want to do something in a chatbot, you say you chat GPT. And so it'll be interesting to see how much they invest in that open source models versus really leaning into their consumer experience. All right. Well, OpenAI, not the only folks rolling out a new model this week. Google also rolled out what they're calling Gemini 2.5 Deep Think. I like that name. It's better than some. The company's first publicly available multi-agent model, meaning it doesn't just give you an answer. It thinks through problems by spawning a team of AI agents that work in parallel, each tackling the challenge from a different angle. So I don't really have a great comparison on capabilities between 2.5 Deep Think and GPT-5, particularly GPT-5 Think just yet. Deep Think does seem to be much more squarely aimed at the scientists, researchers, medicine, academics. It's built on the same tech that won the gold in the International Math Olympiad, and is more focused on really hard problems versus just general consumer usage, particularly things like writing prose. So this really kind of a higher end, deep thinking, difficult scientific reasoning problems kind of model coming out from Google. I think it'll be very popular in the API. It's now live for users on Google's super high-end $250 a month Ultra plan, and the Elite Math Olympiad version, which this was based on, but the actual versions of the Math Olympiad are being made available to select researchers. So Google out there getting some more models out in their space as well. I think they've got a huge opportunity to play into the APIs and models being plugged into developers, because they're really not winning the battle against ChatGPT with the Gemini app. But the Gemini models are pretty awesome. And if you're building on top of something, particularly in the scientific or reasoning field, this is a pretty good model to be using. All right, last but not to be left totally out of the we released a new model this week too game is Anthropic. They dropped an update to their flagship model called Claude Opus 4.1. Less creative, new name, just a 4.1. It's not a big overhaul the way GPT-5 was, but it is a meaningful bump in performance, especially for those who care about precisioning tasks like coding, research, and data analysis. They're calling it state-of-the-art, substantially larger improvements on the way. But this is a nice little performance bump, but it does feel a little Me Too in the announcements of 2.5 Deep Thinking from Gemini, and importantly, GPT-5 and OSS from OpenAI. So everybody out with a little bit of model news this week, but really OpenAI leading the way with the release of the much waited for GPT-5. Well, that is the news I have in the world of large language models. But in addition to large language models, we have some news this week from more media-oriented models as well. And I think this is worth diving into a little bit, though we won't spend quite as long. First up, Grok Imagine from xAI, Elon Musk's AI company. A new image and video generator is now available to all Super Grok and Premium Plus subscribers on the X app. and for iOS. The tool lets users turn single text prompts or into images and images into 15-second short video clips, complete with native audio in just seconds. You can generate static images again from text and then animate those into the stylized clips through the Imagine if you want. This, of course, there's a lot of people doing image generation. Everybody's got a model. What's new about this? It's not the quality. The quality is really still very AI generated feel. You can kind of tell they're cinematic, but not at the level of a Runway, Sora, some of the Google's models. They're just not quite the same quality, but they run, according to Elon, in a fraction of the time, very quick, very cheap. And one of the most interesting and different features is a spicy option in the videos, which produces kind of exactly what you'd expect from the internet and the word spicy. So it's pretty questionable stuff. Very interesting to see XAI, Grok, and Elon still leaning into a lot of kind of questionable ends of the, we'll call it safety, moderation spectrum. I've seen some pretty bad stuff, frankly, coming out of the spicy. So interesting that they chose to not only not put guardrails to prevent NSFW images and videos from being generated, but actually gave an option that is almost exactly suited to and intended to do that. So I think you'll at least see XAI still out there pushing the envelope on that end of the spectrum. Whether you're a fan of that or not, I don't know, but it is an interesting place that they're choosing to live in the spectrum. Next up, out of the video and into the audio, 11 Labs launched what they called 11 Music this week. So 11 Labs, of course, is the most popular, probably most widely used text to audio generation model. So it's a very good, very natural sounding. I use it for some of my projects to do text to speech. They're now launching text to music. And so lets you generate full studio quality tracks from just a text prompt. And we're not just talking about background loops here. This thing gives you control over genre, structure, lyrics, vocals, even mood, instrumentation. You can go everything from psychedelic indie rock with the reverb soaked vocals, or get a haunting English folk ballad with fiddle and all. It's pretty wide, and we may start using it here for this podcast. We got a little music, and 11 Music is cleared for commercial use. So businesses, creators, and game developers can drop these tracks into podcasts like this, into ads, or even full on productions without any legal headaches. Very interesting. I love the music generation space. This obviously, I think musicians, my son's doing a lot of research in machine learning and music this week. And I think musicians have a particular take on how much control they want. But for a lot of creatives who aren't in the music space but need something to accompany another creative work, a podcast, background music, in a video you're producing, I think this is going to be a real boon. And the quality seems to be quite high. It's pretty cool. You can go check it out at 11 Labs and see what it does. All right, moving from, we got videos, we got music. I want to now move on to the release from Google's DeepMind of a new, what they call world model, an update to their Genie world model called Genie 3. So let's just talk for a minute about what a world model is. World models are really a little different from video models, though they feel the same in that they generate video, but they create dynamic, explorable worlds from just a prompt. You can walk through, choose, navigate through all sorts of different environments, from hurricane soaked Florida street, dodge lava in a volcanic wasteland, or fly through an Icelandic canyon. And the key thing here is it develops environmental consistency that holds up for several minutes. As you're moving around, you turn back, the thing that was there is still there. And sometimes that's been a challenge for these models to get right. Genie 3 is really focused on scene generators, emergent memory. It remembers what happened a minute ago and can re-render consistently different parts of scenes, different parts of the world. DeepMind already using it to test a variety of agents and their custom-built worlds. And they're calling this a step towards AGI. And I think that's an interesting take, because it really, to build this kind of world, this kind of experience, you have to have a model of the world itself, not just text in, text out, or video in, video out, but really a sense of like what's going on and how things interact and how they work together. And that's feels like a pretty different kind of capability than what we see out of large language models, or even most of the audio, image, and video generation models. I think it's a pretty cool thing. It's a very different kind of model, and will be maybe a piece of what it takes to get to a more generalizable human-like intelligence. When you talk about actually navigating the real world, an understanding of what's going on in the world in multiple dimensions, I think is a key part of that. So this is pretty cool. You can check it out through DeepMind's site. And I'm going to end up our media-oriented model section with kind of a fun one for parents. It's a little not quite right for my kids, but I sent it to my sister to check out with her kids. Google just launched a Gemini Storybook. This is a new tool that turns your memories, prompts, or even uploaded files into personalized, illustrated storybooks, and it'll read them to you. So you can describe a story you want, like a pirate adventure starring your kid's favorite stuffed animal, or a drawing your kid made of a character. And Gemini will create a custom 10-page book complete with a read aloud and page flipping animations. So this was just super cool to me. And I love to see this in the sense that we've often seen Google out with great models, but not great creative products on top of those models. I, of course, always accept Notebook LM from that as a great product from Google. But this seems like a very cool way to take an interesting model, or probably a series of models, writing a story, visualizing the story, reading the story. That's a bunch of different models, and actually productize them in a clever, creative way. I can see I've definitely had nights when I'm sitting with my kids when they were younger and we'd have an idea and we just come up with a story. And it was very hard for me. I'm not the most creative type, at least in this way. And so coming up with a story that had a good ending and a moral and hung together was tough. And here Gemini is going to take a couple ideas and do that for you. And I saw some great examples of people uploading little crayon drawings from kids, and it turned it into a fully realistic animated character. Very cool thing. If you've got young kids, I highly encourage you to check out Gemini Storybook, and please do let me know how you like it, because I'm very curious if kids resonate with this kind of thing, as well as I think adults find it to be an interesting concept. All right, well, that's all I got for LLMs and media models, but there were a couple of stories in the non-model news category that I thought were worth covering off, things you probably want to know about. First one up is one of our favorite recurring topics on this podcast, science and medicine. Microsoft just dropped something they called Clio, CLIO, which is short for cognitive loop via in situ optimization. So Clio, guys, Clio, much better name than that full long thing. So good job finding an acronym. And it's a big step towards giving large language models something they've historically lacked, the ability to adapt their reasoning in real time. So most of these thinking models have the ability, you can see them step by step, think through problems and kind of iterate on that. But most of those will rely on fixed reasoning strategies that are baked in during training and post training. So Clio throws that out the window. Instead, it lets the model self reflect while it works, literally building its own feedback loops on the fly. It can flag uncertainty, adjust its own reasoning path, and even rerun the entire process if it decides that it's gone off track, something we know lots of large language models have struggled with. And it gives users the ability to tweak all of this, how uncertain the model is allowed to be, how much memory it uses, or when it should rethink something. And this has resulted in a real performance bump in at least some of the benchmarks. One of the notoriously difficult humanities last exam benchmarks is specifically the biomedical reasoning area. Clio took GPT 4.1, so not the 5 model, from just an 8.55% accuracy to over 22%. That's big, and it beats models with native thinking capabilities. So taking a non-reasoning model and adding this capability took it even past models with native reasoning capabilities, building on top of the models. This to me is really interesting because it's a topic we've talked about for several weeks now, where we're seeing improvements in model capability, particularly in not just kind of quick answer, but in reasoning through deep problems, not just from improving data, improving the size or scale of the model, or actually adding reasoning, but adding things on top. It reminds me of my DxO from Microsoft as well. We're talking about multi-agent models, but this idea of what do we layer on top of the model at runtime to allow the models to interact with each other, to think through their reasoning, to do things that are not inherent in the structure of that transformer architecture, but are kind of a system built around that that can really enhance performance and capabilities in real world settings. I think this kind of area is a very active research and going to be really important for some of our more difficult deployment and diffusion problems. How do we get AI really reliable to use in medical settings and scientific settings? I think it's not just going to be a GPT-5 or a GPT-6, but it's going to take this kind of work of layering different capabilities and processes around the core model that really result in systems that are capable of achieving the best. I love seeing Microsoft. There's several stories from Microsoft out here where they're not really developing any core models of their own. They're not out there building the next GPT-5 competitor, but they are doing a lot of interesting research around what goes on around the model. And I think that's going to be a ripe area of innovation for how we actually get the most out of these. And I think a lot of the benefit from these models will be dependent on how well we can deploy them in the world. And so this is, I think, a very cool advancement on that front. All right. While we're discussing the challenges of benchmarks and evaluating AI model performance, because we know benchmarks aren't everything, there's an interesting new approach coming out of Google DeepMind and Kaggle. They just launched Game Arena. It's an open source platform designed to test frontier AI models in strategic head-to-head games. That's right, head-to-head. So model v model, mono, non-mono v non-mono, model v model. Traditional benchmarks are starting to hit a ceiling. Today's large language models often ace them by memorizing patterns, but not really demonstrating true reasoning. And when everybody's scoring so high, it's hard to tell which model is actually smarter. So Game Arena flips the script by putting models into dynamic environments with clear win conditions like chess or Go or poker, where they have to reason, adapt, and strategize in real time and play against one another. The games test for long-term planning and creativity, not just recall. And importantly, the platform is fully open source with standardized game harnesses and a all play all ranking system. So you get all the models in there and everybody gets to play everybody else. And we see who comes out on top. This just kicked off a couple of days ago, so I don't have a lot of data on which models are winning just yet. But I thought this was a really interesting way to think about comparing models versus models in terms of having them actually compete against one another in competitive environments like games, as opposed to going out against some sort of a benchmark like Humanity's Last Exam or ArcAGI, which are pretty constructed, not really real world scenarios, most of them. So it'll be interesting to see where this one leads and what comes out on top. So we'll be following the game arena leaderboards here to see, depending on what game you're playing, which AI you want to be talking to about finding the best strategy. And last up in my not really model news is we talked last week about study mode and ChatGPT. Well, Google did not want to lose out on that student market, and it came back this week with its own student engagement product called Guided Learning in Gemini. And the idea here is pretty similar. AI learning partner that helps students work through problems, not just giving you the answer. Google's adding a bit more multimedia into the mix, images, videos, interactive quizzes. And they've really been working with educators to make sure it encourages critical thinking, looking through different pedagogical approaches and fine tuning their model around that specific set of approaches that are known to be best practices in education. Really, I think leaning into the relationships they have in the education space. And they're making a big accessibility play targeting college students as well, offering their $250 a month AI Pro plan free to college students in select countries, including the US. So if you are a US college student, 18 and over, I had looked and it does, you do have to be 18 or over, but go check it out. That's a pretty big deal. Even if you prefer ChatGPT, free is a good price. You might as well play with Gemini Pro. And there's a lot of cool stuff in there as well. So if you are a student, I think a great time to think about how you're leveraging, or a parent of students, how you're leveraging AI and whether these new guided learning mode or study mode in ChatGPT are really effective ways to help you learn material. And I think help you think about it in different contexts. I always tell my kids that you have a set of material, but just reading through your notes over and over won't help it. Flipping that on its head, going from the answers back to the questions, this kind of thing really helps. And so using these tools to help you actually study and learn the material in different ways, I think will be a huge opportunity for students. It's like a one-on-one personalized tutor that never loses patience and it's just waiting for you all the time and knows everything about any subject you want to study. So for those students out there who'd like a little help in a class, this is a great set of opportunities to take advantage of them. And last up, I want to have a little story about, it'd be harder without debating Annie, but a little story in the alignment section. And this one is going to bring us back to OpenAI. OpenAI out discussing this week how it's rethinking what success actually looks like for ChatGPT. What does success mean? In a new update, OpenAI says their goal isn't to maximize clicks or to maximize screen time. I think a pretty direct comparison to like a Google maximizing clicks or Facebook maximizing screen time, but to help users, quote unquote, make progress, whether that's preparing for tough conversation, understanding lab results, or just untangling a mess of thoughts that they have. Sometimes they say the best outcome is you spending less time in the app because ChatGPT helped you get what you needed and move on. Reminds me actually a lot of Google initially saying the success criteria was how little time you spent on Google, how quickly you found the thing you wanted and went off to that third-party site. We'll see if ChatGPT can maintain this as their economic incentives vary. But it is really interesting that without the kind of existing business models of a Meta or an Alphabet, Google, that they can take a different approach to this, and it doesn't yet run counter to their economic interests. They've introduced a few new features to make this vision more than just idle talk. So now you'll see reminders during long sessions encouraging you to take breaks. If you chat for ChatGPT too long, maybe it's time for a little break. I do this with my kids a lot when they're on the computer for too long. And for emotionally loaded questions, should I break up with a significant other? The model, instead of giving you an answer, will guide you through a thoughtful decision process, more of a thinking partner, maybe call it vibe decision making, but not so much giving you answers. So it's trying to find some ways to be a little more emotionally aware and resonant. So this sounds like a real improvement. There's a lot of focus here on mental health and emotional safety. And OpenAI, I admitted their current models 4.0 and et cetera has not always been great at recognizing signs of stress or delusion or difficult conversations. They're building in some new safeguards and working with a global team of over 90 doctors, mental health experts, and human-computer interaction researchers to improve how ChatGPT responds in these critical moments. This is really an interesting one for me because I think it's a great concept. I love where they're going with it. I think this kind of safeguards and thinking about how the model should interact actually could end up being some of the real differentiators between models, not just is the model better on XYZ benchmark, but how does it choose to interact with you in certain moments? How does it guide you through learning in the right time or guide you through a decision-making process as opposed to giving you a flip answer? How does it recognize moments when the user's query indicates certain kinds of distress and help you in that moment? I think these are really interesting areas of research that aren't core to the training of an LLM in the traditional sense, or beating certain benchmarks in terms of how good is it at coding or math or scientific questions, but really can change the consumer experience in meaningful ways and make a difference in terms of consumer adoption. Like, how am I going to use this? Where am I going to use this? How comfortable am I using this? So it sounds great. I love it conceptually. I think it will be really interesting to see how, as there are real economic incentives at play, as these businesses start to have more robust economic models, whether these kinds of ideas run counter to those economic models, and if so, how true to this mission can these companies stay when their economic incentives run counter to them, especially given the number of billions of dollars they've raised that they need to recoup and repay to investors and make a profit for those investors on. I think it will become harder and harder for them to do this over time if their economic models do run counter to this. Of course, a subscription model is great for that. If you're better for the user and the user chooses you and pays you with money, that's a great. But as soon as you get into advertising driven business models, which are very common, of course, on the internet, then you start to see different incentives around what you want those users to do, how long you want them to stay on site, what kind of answers you want to give them. And it will be very interesting for us to watch how the new players that don't have right now the need to be profitable, how they approach these questions, what kind of business models they adopt, and how those business models drive their behavior moving forward. They, of course, are in better position than some of the existing players who have, Google, a big business model to protect, that they need to be cautious of, stealing share away towards something like a Gemini that does maybe better for the user, but worse for the bottom line. That's real dollars out of their pocket, at least on one side of the business that OpenAI, Anthropic don't have to think about. But it will, as they find the need to actually turn a profit. These things will be interesting to see if they can stay there or not, and if they can stay true to this kind of vision of an AI that helps you become better, and how that gets traded off against the AI that makes them money, which ultimately I think is one of the key questions. That's all I got for this week on What the AI. We'll be back next week. Annie will be back next week with her own guest host as I take my own summer vacation. But as always, we'll be back to break down the latest news, bring you the latest insights, and just plain old What the AI moments. Make sure to follow or subscribe in whatever app you are listening or watching in. And if you found this episode valuable, please do share this podcast and this episode with anyone else you know trying to make sense of all the craziness going on in the world of AI. And of course, don't forget to send us your questions, prompts, questions, your favorite AI stories. You just may hear them featured in a future episode. As always, you can reach us at email at whattheai.fm. Until then, we'll see you next week. Ready to expand your AI knowledge? Want to become the go-to AI expert in your organization? Take the next step with Upstart's AI certification for financial services. This comprehensive course simplifies the fundamentals of artificial intelligence for financial services professionals. Both the course and this podcast are brought to you by Upstart, whose leading AI lending marketplace connects millions of consumers to banks and credit unions that leverage Upstart's AI technology to deliver superior credit products, from personal loans to auto loans to home equity lines of credit. If you learned something useful this week, hit subscribe on YouTube or leave us a rating on iTunes or Spotify. Your support can help others discover What the AI. And finally, share your biggest AI questions and insights with us at email at whattheai.fm. We really do read every message, and we do our best to cover them all on the show.